Welcome. We're got a treat for you today. In my view, the most important entrepreneur in the country is Matt Scholz, and you're going to get to meet him. He epitomizes the convergence of all these technological trends that I've been describing for several decades, culminating in what I call the information theory of economics. And I summed it up this morning: wealth is knowledge, and growth is learning, signified by all the learning curves that pervade our economy. With every doubling of total units sold, prices drop between 20 and 30%. And finally, money is time. And that's perhaps the most important of the insights because it's the most novel. And time is what remains scarce when everything else grows abundant. And money has to manage all the trade-offs and transactions and prioritization of an economy. And all these decisions and trade-offs all happen in the context of the inexorable scarcity of time. And I believe that it's money that translates the scarcity of time into the economy. And when governments manipulate money, they're really rebelling against time. And a new vindication of the value of this insight, that money is time, has come from two economists named Tupy and Pooley, one from St. Andrews in Scotland and one from Brigham Young in Hawaii, on different sides of the earth, and they show that time prices really are the fundamental price. What you pay when you buy a good or commodity or service in the economy is the time it took you to earn the money to buy it. And if you take the average wage in a society and divide it into the GDP, you can acquire a time price in hours and minutes that measures far more accurately than the muddled array of CPIs and consumption expenditure indices and PPIs, producers' price indices, and GDP deflators, all these measures that are all subjective and yield these preposterous results that you hear people declare constantly, that all this massive, pervasive advance of technology that we've been experiencing over the last 30, 40, 100 years around the world has all been almost entirely ineffectual. It hasn't really increased productivity very much. It ends up with interest rates that are measured as negative interest rates, which are really a preposterous phenomenon. And what the time prices show, just to sum it up quickly, I discussed it this morning, what the time prices show is that since 1980 really, population in the world has grown 70%, 71%, and prices have dropped 72%. So this is prices of the 50 key commodities for human life and sustenance. So all the claims you hear that somehow technological advance and capitalist growth is unsustainable are clearly false. With every increase of percent of population, you get more than a percent of increased abundance of all the commodities. The essence of it is Julian Simon's insight that that human beings cannot be contemplated simply as mouths. Human beings are minds, and all the wealth in the society comes from the products of these minds, human minds, which are the ultimate resource in Simon's scheme, and which Tupy and Pooley have extended across the whole world economy, showing that economic growth across the world has been 2 or 3 times faster than any of the GDP estimates. All the CPIs and GDP deflators simply miss all the advances in technology that are all over the place, and they just don't measure them very well. And so they yield these preposterous results that result in all the ululations about negative interest rates, and the middle class is vastly benefited from all the technologies and globalization, and the trade with China have enormously enriched the middle class, judged by the time that a blue-collar worker has to spend in order to buy an incremental unit of any of the major commodities or things he buys. And so, however, there has been questions about health care, and health care is amazingly inefficient. It's dominated by government. It's afflicted by this awful assumption that that a reasonable insurance system should be divided into 50 different states with essentially a single payer in each state, disguised as a private insurance system. And so I think, but I'd just ask you whether any of you here would prefer to go back to the healthcare systems of the 1950s, and or whether you happily spend your money on existing panoply of healthcare possibilities and healthcare capabilities. Anyway, Matt was started as a computer software coder, and when he discovered that the human body essentially consists of a coded system, the DNA system, he sold his software company and bought 2 patents. How old were you when you did this?
In my 20s. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, in his 20s. He started a successful software company doing a logistical software for trucking, right?
Yeah.
And he sold it. How much did you get for it?
Not enough.
You did get it. It was one of the great coups in the history of enterprise. He converted this only marginally successful, but nonetheless saleable software computer company into 2 patents that David Baltimore, Nobel laureate, had developed, and which were regarded to be so futuristic that they were seen as not worth anything. David Baltimore became the president of Caltech. And describe the patents that you...
I say he had built a tool to basically modify your stem cells, a hematopoietic stem cell from bone marrow, with a virus, and then grow it into a B cell, a kind of immune cell that would secrete specific HIV antibodies. So the general patent was around how to program this element of the immune system. And what's fascinating about it was, as George put, largely kind of relegated to academia, and partly because it took about 10 weeks to do it, and it wasn't very efficient. So when we licensed it and we modified it, we dropped the time down from 10 weeks to 10 days initially, and then 7, and made it so it was viable. So that's going into clinic ideally now. It's under FDA review. But it was a tool to basically build an app store for the human body. And so instead of making a drug and injecting it, you could program your body to produce the treatment itself.
Yeah. And there were those were, and your company is based on, you have 3 companies now based on this insight.
Yeah, it's that the essence of life is information. And I'll go through this in more detail for those of you who get up early enough tomorrow morning to watch this. I have slides, but but this idea that the essence of life is information, and that chemistry is a substrate. And for most of the history of medicine, we've treated the body as though it's a chemical machine, and we've tried to address disease and pathology by monkeying with the chemistry. And I think that's fundamentally the wrong approach. It's not that it hasn't served us well to a certain extent, but I think what makes you is information. I mean, it can turn a glass of wine into flesh and blood in a matter of hours. Yeah, see, drink up. So it's get some more cells. And just like you wouldn't try to debug Microsoft Word by changing the microchips in your computer, you shouldn't try to fix disease by monkeying with the chemical underpinnings of life. And so it became like the North Star for me as I entered the world of biology. And now we're doing things like killing cells based on what they're thinking and trying to tackle aging itself as a disease.
Yeah, and your first company is ImmuSoft.
Yeah. And
tell us about that.
So ImmuSoft was the app store for the human body. So that's the one where you, instead of making drugs, you take out the cells and program them. The second was Oshin, and it was focused on aging, and basically with a tool that will kill a cell based on what it's thinking. And sounds like an odd statement, but if you consider that every cell in your body, every nucleated cell in your body has effectively the same genome, but the genes that are read in, say, a skin cell are different than a muscle cell or a nerve cell. And what's interesting is they just run different apps, basically. So same files on the hard drive, different apps running. And you have apps for damage repair, for cancer. You have antivirus apps. And with a computer program, written in DNA, you can tell what apps are running. And so we basically inject this into your body, and the first one's actually a very simple program. It says, if you're damaged, kill yourself. Don't try to fix it. Sounds a little fascist, I know.
He wants to do it for me.
Yeah.
It's killing off zombie cells.
Yeah.
He says zombie cells are accumulating to an alarming extent in my brain and body, and so I need to have them eliminated. How would I do it,
We need to make an immortal Gilder. This is on my
Well, I don't need to be immortal. I just need to have to think clearly.
So one of the underpinnings of this is an idea that a lot of the pathologies we associate with old age are actually caused by the accumulation of damaged cells. And it's like the reason you get a wrinkle, for example, isn't that your body forgot how to make collagen. Still has the gene for collagen, still has cells that can make it. But it stopped for some reason. And one of the reasons is that you accumulate damaged cells, and they effectively poison their environment, and they'll prevent nearby stem cells from regenerating. And there's this great study done by the Mayo Clinic initially in mice where they genetically modified it as an embryo so that they could kill those cells throughout its life with a simple drug. And the results were astounding. I mean, they made it all over the public press and the scientific literature. And they had just the photos of the mice were amazing enough. They're litter mates, same diet, same lifestyle, same genetics, but in one you got rid of damage and one you didn't. And the ones you got rid of damage lived longer by about 20-25%, but they're half as likely to get cancer, and they looked and acted young until they died. So their hair was fine, they didn't get cataracts, they're perfectly healthy. But the problem is, in the grand tradition of academia, it was useless. You can't go back in time and modify your own embryo. And so, yeah, no, direct. I'd have a very different business plan if I could do that. But I
thought you could do that.
I don't know. Maybe give me a couple more money shows, I'll work on it. So we set about trying to build a tool that would do this in a way that was clinically viable. And so the way ours works is you basically just inject this genetic program that causes those cells to die. And there are other ways people have tried to tackle this, mostly with chemotherapies that have been repurposed from cancer. But the problem is that a lot of those cause more damage than they fix. And so, in fact, when we used to want to artificially age mice for testing, we would give them high doses of chemo and radiation just to artificially age them, which is demoralizing if you've ever had cancer or know someone who has that. The standard of care is basically the most efficient way the scientists thought up to poison a mouse. And but that's what we do. And so right now, we're kind of in a weird limbo in that there's these newer treatments, like the one we're building, you can't get today, but people have started to repurpose ones you could buy in the longevity space. Probably the most common one for that is a cocktail of a drug called vasitinib with a supplement called quercetin. And quercetin is a QU.
Quercetin.
Quercetin,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've heard that, yeah.
And so people take this. In fact, the Mayo Clinic is back at it. They've done a couple trials of this already. One's in progress, one's finished, for diseases of old age. One for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and one for chronic kidney disease. But you take this 3 days a week for 3 weeks, and it kills a bunch of these cells. And it didn't kill any of the patients, so that's good. But always what you hope for in a phase 1 trial. No casualties. But it's an approved drug, so it's generic. And so there's I know a bunch of people who have already started taking it, both in the medical community and the longevity community. And it's so we're kind of on this weird edge where we're in between the next generation of treatments and the last. And I think of these in some respects as like they're kind of ghetto, right? They might buy you a little bit of time, but in the end, time is what's scarce. And if you can give yourself a little boost, then there's a better treatment coming out later. And I think that's what people are up to today.
And oncogenics?
Oh, yeah.
You have a third.
The third one, yeah. The third one spun out of the second. And it's basically using the same kind of technology to go after cancer. And this, once again, on this idea that a cancer cell knows that it's cancerous. I mean, it might dupe the surrounding tissue into thinking it's all hunky-dory, but it itself knows. I mean, by the time you have cancer, a lot had to go wrong. I mean, you have DNA repair pathways that should have corrected the damage. You have like internal anti-cancer defenses. You have immune surveillance, and then you have just the surrounding body going after it. So you have tumor suppressors, immune surveillance, and all those have to fail by the time you actually have cancer in a setting that's clinical. And so when the cell's in that state, it's severely damaged. And so once again, you've got a little program that says, hey, if all these damage switches, if those lights are on, just commit suicide. And it sounds odd, but cells have like really advanced ways of killing themselves because they need to all the time. Like they do it if they get infected by a virus, if they get damaged too badly, if they're no longer needed. And so they have a programmed death pathways that are.
It's called apoptosis.
Yeah, apoptosis. Yeah. It's like it's probably more analogous to cellular recycling than suicide, which sounds a little nicer at least. But the cell basically bottles up all of its nasty bits and sends them out for reuse or disposal. But it occurs really fast. In fact, I have some videos of it that I'll show on my slides where we watched it with a microscope over time lapse, and the cells look like they like bubble and then explode, and they're gone within minutes or hours.
What was that significance of that gigantic muscular cow you showed?
Yeah, so at the it started as a hobby project really. My general motto is anything but diet and exercise, and so I had been looking at some of these kind of genetic mutants. In one case, this cow, that it lacks a gene called myostatin, and myostatin is, we thought of as like a muscular brake, and so it's why people don't grow like trees forever. And basically its purpose in life is to keep you as weak as possible. And that sounds like a bad thing, but if you consider for most of the time humans have spent on the planet, starvation was a real threat. And muscle is metabolically expensive, so your body doesn't want it if it doesn't need it. When you exercise and you damage the muscle, your body makes this molecule called follistatin that takes that break away and you get stronger. But if you have amounts to a genetic defect where you can't make myostatin, you're about twice the muscle mass of a normal organism. And this occurred naturally in cows, and that they're, yeah, some photos of it. They look like Arnold Schwarzenegger cows. It's like enormous cows. Huge, huge. And they've been, I think it was first documented in the 1800s when one occurred naturally. But
how did it get documented in 1800?
Oh, yeah, so it just was a genetic freak. It had a birth defect, effectively, that made it really buff. And this was, of course, caught the interest of the local farmers who thought it would be fun to breed it and make more of them, and which they did. And so there's a bunch of them now. And interesting enough, the only reason that, or the primary reason they don't breed them all the time is they have a high maternal mortality because the fetus cow is also really big. And so they sometimes have to do like cesarean to get it out and stuff, which doesn't occur in nature in cows. So,
what was your idea about alligator blood?
Oh, yeah. So this will be a future company.
Is there any progress on the alligator?
No, regrettably, no progress on it. I've been busy, but this, I want to make a new class of antibiotic out of alligator blood. And if you think about it, like an alligator, you can like cut off its leg and throw it into the Everglades, and it doesn't get an infection. Like it'll heal, and usually, if you skin your knee and go into the Everglades, you're probably getting sepsis. And so. The alligator, though, is a really violent creature, and they frequently mangle themselves. And what's particularly interesting is this is basically a living dinosaur. It's been around forever, and it lives in microbial Valhalla, like the perfect place for bacteria to be. But even though it, quote unquote, I guess, abuses its antibiotic, taking it all the time, the bacteria have never gained the upper hand. For all those eons, the alligator still comes out on top, and unlike us, really. And so. If you take, in fact, alligator blood, you spin out the plasma and you put it on things like MRSA or these superbugs, it just slaughters all of them. It's like incredibly potent. But what's interesting is it doesn't hurt the alligator's microbiome because it has a microbiome like we do, analogous. And so it got me thinking about what in the blood would do that. And it turns out humans also have antimicrobial proteins in their blood that can kill things in dishes. They're just nowhere near as powerful as the alligators. And so I thought it would be fun to basically find the alligator protein and do point mutations on it until it became compatible with the human immune system, and then I could get super alligator powers.
So ultimately, this is the future of pharmacology. We move the drug factories from remote places, the Philippines or Puerto Rico or wherever they are, and move them into the human body and allow them to produce the needed molecules for a lifetime, or for how many years do they keep functioning once you've changed the relevant DNA
You can do
instructions?
them for as short as a week or as long as a lifetime, really, depending on how you do it. The ImmuSoft one, half-life of those cells, I think it's around 20 years. And so if you take actually the blood of an 80-year-old, you can still find antibodies against smallpox in it, back from when. They don't vaccinate people my age for smallpox, but back when it was common, like the response from either the vaccine or the virus, it lasts for decades, and so you can still see them, and they're being made by the exact same cell that made them all those years ago. It's really pretty wild.
So this is a radical vision of the future of all healthcare, really, and it promises to continue this kind of radical drop in the cost of all commodities that have been documented using time prices for the 50 commodities most crucial to human life. And this is a global phenomenon. This kind of progress has happened everywhere, all around the world. And mostly it eludes all the various projections of growth and GDP and advance that economists calculate. And so almost all the numbers that economists offer and discuss and express alarm about are mismeasured. And since they're mismeasured, they give a completely wrong guide to policy. I mean, the administration apparently believes that this emergence of the trade gap somehow hurt somebody in the United States. This is a misconception. The trade gap inflicts no damage on anybody in the United States. If a foreigner has $1, he has two choices. If he earns $1, he can use it to buy an American good or service and consume it. And we don't have it anymore. Or if this recipient of $1 imagines that the United States is a very special place, if he really likes America and he thinks it a land of opportunity, a land of stable legal systems and constitution and Christianity, whatever it is, he may decide to spend the dollar buying part of America, buying an asset. And he can't do both at once. He can buy the apple and eat it, and we don't have it anymore. That's what Trump wants him to do. Or he can buy a share in Apple Computer and have part of America, and we keep it. And how it's better to have him buy soybeans or fruit rather than assets in America is very hard for me to understand. And this is the fundamental mistake that's currently being made and motivates the trade war. It's mainly numbers. It's mainly because we calculate, since the era of mercantilism, we've calculated trade gaps between nations, but we don't calculate trade gaps between states. And because we don't calculate trade gaps across the United States, we aren't constantly expressing anguish and distress about the trade gap between California, Nevada, or Iowa and Florida, or whatever. We just don't care. But really, there's only one economy, and it's the global economy. And the idea that we can separate it back into national entities again, dissolving all these incredibly complex supply chains that understay all our technological society, is just delusional. It's simply a delusion that comes from believing that the middle class somehow has been hurt. Even in the United States, the most recent Tupy-Pooley calculations come from the Farm Bureau's annual calculation of the cost of a Thanksgiving dinner, all the fixings, gallon of milk, 16-pound turkey. The Farm Bureau, since 1986, every year has calculated the cost of this dinner. And the Farm Bureau estimates that over these 40 years, nearly 40 years, the Thanksgiving dinner costs essentially the same as it did back in 1986. But when you actually calculate time prices, you discover that the Thanksgiving dinner that the average worker had to pay 32 hours to buy, 32 minutes to buy, he now buys for 9.2 minutes. In other words, there's been a radical reduction in the burden that is represented by an elaborate Thanksgiving dinner. And this applies all across the whole economy and shows that many of the distresses that we feel are mostly cultural, religious, moral, familial distresses. But the economics is not the problem, and certainly globalization's not the problem, and trade is not the problem. So, and this just shows that in the area where we think progress may have been slower because healthcare costs have steadily expanded as a share of GDP as our population has grown older. The prospects are probably more exciting and dramatic than anywhere else. As healthcare becomes an information service rather than part of information technology rather than a branch of chemical technology. And that's a huge transformation which we've seen pass through all the other facets of our economy and now are coming dramatically into the healthcare field. But all these technologies, I think, I always look for unities, things that unify all the different technological trends. And I believe that the next phase, the crucial phase, addresses the two biggest crises in the world economy by my estimate. And one is the collapse of internet security. I mean, the more money we spend on internet security, the expenditures rising of roughly 20% a year, the less security we get. To the extent that we're now so paranoid we don't even dare use a foreign router in our telephone systems. I mean, it's really bizarre that this paranoia has emerged as a result, not of real threats or anything, but as a result of the collapse of the internet security architecture, the IP address and its localization, its association with different governments all think they own the IP addresses and their domains, and it'll creates this politicization of the internet, which I think is part of the problem of the increasing paranoia about foreign governments invading our precious bodily fluids through our communications networks. And so, anyways, the other big problem, I believe, is the scandal of money, which I've been speaking about for a decade now. And it's epitomized by $5.1 trillion a day of currency trading that also completely fails. This $5.1 trillion a day, that's 72 times all trade in goods and services, doesn't even prevent trade wars and currency wars. Its sole role, as far as I can see, is to allow politicians to bully central banks into stealing from the future to reward their constituencies today. That's the sole virtue of this system. And I think that the great role of the blockchain is that it addresses both these problems. You could have an internet architecture that's not localized, that's based on public keys and private keys, and that allows individuals to control their data and buy and sell it as they wish. It allows a degree of anonymity in conducting transactions, but also the ability of attestation, which means that if the government comes and charges you with tax evasion or embezzlement, or a corporation asserts that you're breaking a contract, you can document with an immutable time-stamped global database your actual behavior. And I think this restores a balance between the individual and big governments and other authorities that is a great advance in the history of money. And this advance in itself should assure the triumph of the blockchain system. I think blockchain both enables a new security architecture for the internet, and it enables a new form of global money that can address the current scandal of money, the current international crisis suggested by demanded trade wars and even the illusion you hear voiced all the time on the news, the fake news, that somehow we can win a trade war against China. That sounds pretty exciting. When China is 3 times as big as us and has millions more engineers than we do, somehow it's going to be good for us if we separate our technology economy from the Chinese market, which is 2/3 of the global technology market. Somehow, if we force China into autarky in order to win a trade war, we lose. And so it's, but the whole world really loses. And so I think this is, and so the blockchain is kind of a providential technology that solves these key problems. Now, so we've got 10 minutes or so for questions if anybody has questions. I don't, the government thinks it does. All governments think they own IP addresses. IP addresses are attached to specific places, and governments feel they have a right to rule a crucial infrastructure in their domains, and so they claim to own IP addresses and regulate them and hector technology companies for ascribing to the technology companies what I regard to be an erroneous convergence of content and conduit, which would have made the internet impossible if it had been imposed on the internet itself. And so IP addresses are at the root of the nationalization of internets and the segmentation of internets around the globe. I think blockchain is developing all around the world. There's never been such a global movement of technology all over the place. And so not only is if it's suppressed at one point, it typically metastasizes at another point. And so I think it's quite a robust movement. But I also believe that this global monetary system is so self-evidently awry. It's so ineffective in stopping financial crises. And, you know, the economy, the entrepreneurial economy, folks like Matt are creating like mad and advancing world conditions of life. But meanwhile, the financial system has catastrophic crashes every 10 years or so, even more often at various times. And it's accompanied by a hypertrophy of finance, where in many years banks collect as much as 40% of the nation's profits. And meanwhile, refusing to finance risky business. They're increasingly fleeing into various pyramid schemes of derivatives and swaps and all kinds of jerry-built securities that we saw in the last crash. So when banks or perform their real function, they lend to companies, and they can't really lend more money than companies can profitably use, than entrepreneurs can profitably use. So their growth is limited, but with this kind of tumorous growth of securities and derivatives that self-evidently don't achieve the purpose of preventing crashes and economic distresses, I think we need a new form of gold, a new form of digital gold, which was what Satoshi thought he was inventing. And we need a new architecture for the internet. And both these needs are so evident. A billion breaches last year, more than that already this year with the Capital One catastrophe. And it seems to me that this technology has legs.
The microphone?
Yeah.
Said, show me the condition of a man's mouth and I'll show you the condition of his body. He said that 3,000 years ago.
Who said what?
Hippocrates said that.
Said what?
Show me the condition of a man's mouth, in his mouth, and I'll show you the condition of his body, the health of it. And yet, dentists still mostly use amalgam fillings and promote fluoride to the tune of $100 million a year to advertise it. Is the thinking that you talk about, the sea change in thinking, is that going to have the potential to change that mindset and that kind of a practice in our health system, which is duplicated across it in terms of heart disease and everything else?
You know, I didn't hear that question. Did you hear it, Matt?
Not all of it.
Am I speaking too close?
Somehow
to the
you're
microphone?
talking, your voice is blurring into the speaker.
How about this?
That's better.
Yeah.
3,000 years ago, Hippocrates stated that if you show me the mouth, I'll show you the condition.
Okay.
And yet today,
So this has to do with fluoride.
yeah, but no, I mean, as an example, amalgam and skin, so
I think that this is a fundamentally better and more correct method of applying healthcare, medical curatives, remedies to relieve human ills. And
Yeah, I think some of these things, like going after, say, aging itself as a disease, very much will change that paradigm. I mean, we've, for pretty much all of human history, just focused on treating a symptom, a pain point. And if you think of like age itself as like a master corollary of every disease. Like, I mean, you have worse odds having cancer as a clean living 60-year-old than you do a chain smoking 20-year-old. And it's not that, you know, your youth won't come back to haunt you, but basically this age itself is a driver of all manners of pathology. And so when you start to look at like the underpinning aspects of biology and deal with them, I think you will see a fundamental shift in the way we look at the symptoms also. It's not that, I mean, I'm sure there'll be some kind of fluoride or tooth filling until we start growing new replacement teeth, but actually I don't think that's entirely too far away. So you can rot your teeth out of your head and then grow a new one. But I don't know if that really directly answers the question, but I think going after the core underpinnings of, in this case, life and biology, I think has a considerable benefit over just treating things that break.
yes, I see crypto establishing a better world financial system over the next decades. It's going to be constantly extending its sway. It's along with the advance of digital currencies of different kinds. Cash has already been obsoleted in China. Almost all transactions in China are now done with digital wallets, smartphones. In much of the third world, money is moving to smartphone technology. And increasingly, the crypto industry will be generating unifying algorithms that can overcome this currency trading turbulence that confers no benefits. There's no benefits to this 5.1. The biggest industry in the world economy is currency trading, and it's an utter waste. It doesn't accomplish anything. It can't even prevent endless hedging of any transaction across international borders. You still got to hedge it for shifts in currency values. It's just a failed system. And yes, there's a lot of stake in perpetuating the system, but it's utterly vulnerable to global and digital solutions. And this is restoring the great wisdom that the human race reached in establishing the gold standard. Under Isaac Newton, really launched the gold standard in Britain. It made Britain the center of the world economy. It gave them an empire on which the sun never set. It enabled the Industrial Revolution to peculiarly emerge in this little country. The gold standard is demonstrably the most successful kind of money that was ever invented. And I believe that a digital form of the gold standard will blow away all these currency trading carnival barkers. Well, they'll try to stop it. All incumbent technologies try to stop emergent, insurgent technologies. That's inevitable. But if the insurgent technologies are much better, and the whole technological community around the world, a new generation of inventors and entrepreneurs are devoted to this new model, it's likely to prevail. And I believe that it will prevail. Yes, governments will resist it, but governments are ambivalent. They also want to use it. And so I believe it will ultimately win. I'm not saying that necessarily gold had I could explain gold. I did in Scandal of Money. Gold essentially measures the time it takes to extract it. That hasn't changed in hundreds of years. It's a time measure. But that's sort of happenstance. But I believe that time prices can be translated into a new global currency that can actually unify the world economy again and eliminate a lot of this paranoid conflict that we currently see.
Yeah.
Well, the gold standard, I think gold is very is the intrinsic money because of it measures time, not because it's a commodity. Money isn't valuable because it's really jewelry. Jewelry is valuable because it's really money. And that's why why jewelry is valuable. This idea that somehow gold gains value because of its uses in niche uses in electronics or in wedding rings is just a misconception. It measures time. That's why gold was the most successful money until 1971, when, or even 67, when Johnson divorced the U.S. from the gold standard. But before, that was the global money. We had lots of different currencies, but they all were convertible into gold, so that we had a global measuring stick for value based on time. And we have to restore that system in order to have a truly robust and prosperous future.
Good for, yeah, I think he's,
Yes. Yes, the storage is the great miracle that the blockchain is a smaller burden on storage and computers as it grows. The storage technology has been expanding a lot more rapidly than the blockchain has expanded, so the blockchain is a decreasing burden on the storage systems of our smartphones and computers, and even disk drives are becoming vastly powerful, and solid state disk drives now can hold little, about the size of this picture there, can now hold petabytes. I think it's 5 petabytes. A wonderful company in Silicon Valley called Pure Storage is just performing miracles with solid state drive technology.
Judge? Yeah. Hello. For cryptocurrencies to...
The light is really right in my face here. I can't...
For cryptocurrencies to take over, do they still need the national fiat currencies? Because commodities cannot buy the crypto. It goes through the dollar or the fiat currencies to buy the, say, the Bitcoin. Is cryptocurrency still supported by the national fiat currencies? Is that how you envision that cryptocurrency will take over?
Did you get that?
Yeah, would cryptocurrency still be dependent on a fiat currency to function, specifically for brokering into commodities and back, right?
For what?
For purchasing commodities and back. So does it still depend on a fiat currency somewhere in the middle?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, money will be digital and not dependent on fiat currencies, ultimately, if it's based on a measuring stick of time. But I should discuss that with you. It depends what you mean by a fiat currency. It's not a currency controlled by governments. They don't have to be controlled by governments, any more than gold was controlled by governments.
Far side?
I don't think fiscal and monetary policy are both false concepts. They're macroeconomics, which I call macromancy. It's based on all sorts of miscalculations and misunderstandings. Individual entrepreneurs in the information theory of economics, expanding knowledge through processes of learning, through launching business plans which are an embodiment of the scientific method in the economy, thus increasing knowledge as they expand their productivity, is the way economies work. Knowledge is wealth, and Neanderthal in his cave had all the physical resources we have today. The difference between our age and the Stone Age, as Thomas Sowell said years ago, is entirely the expansion of knowledge. And that's what wealth is. And all this fiscal policy and monetary policy are all ways to fool entrepreneurs, to deceive them into misunderstanding the real conditions of the economy. Thus, in their effort to guarantee growth, they thwart growth, they prevent growth. Government guarantees prevent growth because knowledge is dependent on falsifiable propositions, on propositions that are stated in a form that can be refuted. So learning is getting unexpected knowledge. It's not guaranteeing a specific industrial system. We've had a lot of technological transformations. We still see horses out there. There's still even buggy whips. Banks, to the extent that they really can conduct their crucial role, which is lending money to entrepreneurs, perform a valuable function. It's when they abandon this function and demanding guarantees from government so that they can take preposterous risks with crazy labyrinthine securities, that banking system deserves to collapse and fail. Yeah. You may be right, but there will be new politicians. I'm not going to be around too much longer, so... yeah, your kids will be around. Your kids... And I believe governments are... Look, the Chinese are now contemplating a blockchain-based yuan. The head of the Chinese central bank was an advocate of a return to a global gold standard after the 2008 financial crisis. The head of the New York Stock Exchange is launching a blockchain-based exchange entity called the BACT, B-A-K-T. All around the world, people are experimenting with blockchains. It's the ascendant technology, and it's going to prevail, and the politicians will claim to have invented it.
George, you have one more right there.
I guess we're... Well, I do a daily prophecy, a daily newsletter that is called Gilder's Daily Prophecy, or Agora Financial. I do that. I do a monthly newsletter called the Gilder Report. I do moonshots for special blockchain opportunities. I do all this stuff, and it's all available out there. And blockchain is currently complicated to exploit as an investor, but nonetheless, $25 billion was raised in initial coin offerings over 12 months last year. $25 billion on the Ethereum platform, and it's a major demonstrable success Bitcoin has its proof of work blockchain that survived for 10 years without being hacked, despite having billions of dollars available to anybody who can breach it. And the wallets and exchanges got hacked, but the actual blockchain has never been broken. This is a demonstrably successful technology, and there are thousands of improvements on it being launched as we speak. And it's really the great arena of opportunity and technology, along with the information revolution in healthcare. They're launching what are called security token offerings, which are smart contracts like the 2000 on the Ethereum blockchain that nonetheless comply with Reg A and the other various SEC rules and allow ordinary investors to invest in blockchain projects. And there's a lot going on, and they want you to invest. So during the course of this year, it's going to become increasingly possible to purchase shares in blockchain projects. You can do it now, and you can buy Bitcoin if you want. I'm a somewhat skeptic of Bitcoin, but it certainly has it's how this thing started, and it's not going away. So there are many ways you can exploit this revolution, but I have to go to dinner.